working for you. This is 23 News at 5.
Duke Webb, the Florida man accused of killing 3 people and wounding several others in a mass shooting inside Don Carter Lanes in Rockford nearly 3 years ago, hires his 3rd attorney. 23 News reporter Jim Haggerty learns that while Duke Webb can hire any lawyer he wants, there could come a time when a judge steps in and puts the brakes on excessive attorney changes.
Connor, Duke Webb isn't at that point yet, but the case is nearly 3 years old, and the court must wait on a fitness hearing, which has not happened yet. Now, that means it's not even been determined if he's psychologically fit to stand trial.
Most clients have the right to have the attorney of their choice.
That means it was within accused mass shooter Duke Webb's rights when he parted ways with Chicago defense attorney Damon Sharonis last month. He's now represented by the Winnebago County Public Defender's Office. Rockford attorney Renisha Williams is not connected to the Webb case, but says the former soldier could theoretically continue changing lawyers unless he's stopped by the court.
The biggest issue you're going to have is a judge in a position where a case is not moving. Right? Judges want to see cases either be set for trial or move towards negotiations.
That's when Judge John Gibbons could intervene and decide that Webb's lawyer changes are excessive and meant only to stall the case.
When a person charged fires an attorney, gets a new attorney, is pro se a little bit, and then gets another attorney, the case is not moving. So judges are a little hesitant sometimes to continue to allow that person to not move the case.
In a status hearing Friday, Gibbons ordered Webb to stop filing ex parte motions, filings made without including his lawyer and the state.
You cannot send an ex parte conversation or communication and ask the judge to make a ruling because you're not including the other party.